And Builders Association stated that my common sense conservative plan to axe the sales tax on new homes under $1 million is, and I quote, the most significant housing announcement made in the past 2 decades. Removing the GST shows leadership to cut crippling levels of taxation on new housing, puts money directly back in the pockets of Canadians while combating the housing crisis. Why won't the Prime Minister listen to the people who build homes so that we can reverse the crisis he caused? Why don't we axe the sales tax on new homes today?
Yeah, that would tremendously help millions of Canadians.
You know what shows leadership, Mr. Speaker? Taking seriously the
Security
safety
clearance.
of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP has concluded that the government of India was involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil, in extortion, in violence, in drive-by shootings, in home invasions, and the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada refuses to get his security clearance so that he can keep Canadians safe, can even keep his fellow MPs safe. That's why I've asked our security services to find a way to share some information with him so maybe he can do at least a part of his job.
Release the names right now on the House floor.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We'd like to see him do any of his job after 9 years, Mr. Speaker, like reversing the housing price increase he caused. Let me quote British Columbia's Victoria Residential Builders Association said, quote, reducing government costs, including GST, would have a significant impact on housing affordability. The Conservative leader's suggestion is welcome news and long overdue if the federal government wants to get serious about housing affordability for Canadians. This common sense plan will stimulate 30,000 new extra homes built every year. So will he accept my common sense plan to axe the tax and build the homes?
There you go.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Conservatives, you always need to look at the fine print underneath the easy slogans. And the fine print on this one is cutting billions of dollars of investments in housing right across the country at a time where we need to be building more housing more quickly. Cuts are not the solution. But if he wants to take something seriously, perhaps he should take seriously the issue of national security, because he refuses, for inexplicable, political, childish, who knows what reasons, refuses to get his security clearance that will allow him to keep his own MPs safe, to keep Canadians safe, to keep our democracy and its institutions safe.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years after promising he'd get rid of chronic homelessness, it's actually risen by 38%. Now there are 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario. It's almost as bad as it is in NDP-governed British Columbia. But there is good news. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness heard about my common sense plan to axe the GST on housing, and their founder said, this is smart. Mr. Speaker, those who are fighting to end homelessness, like my solution of axing the sales tax on new homes, will he accept my plan to axe the tax and build the homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, like I said, if he wants to be helpful on the issue against homeless, maybe he could give a call to his fellow Conservatives, the premiers of Saskatchewan and Ontario, to agree to accept the money we're putting on the table that they could match to support people living in encampments and fight homelessness effectively on the ground. But he won't do that. What else he won't do is get his security clearance. So
What the hell does that have to do with homelessness?
His fellow MPs protect Canadians in this democracy. He refuses to get the security clearance necessary to keep Canadians safe. That's not the kind of leadership Canadians have.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Systemic anti-black discrimination is widespread in the public service. In fact, the Treasury Board Secretariat found that the Canadian Human Rights Commission discriminated against black employees. Now, instead of supporting these workers, Right now, the Liberal government is fighting these workers in court. So will the Prime Minister stop fighting black employees in court and settle the Thompson class action lawsuit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in extending the UN decade of support for people of African descent, this government has done more to recognize systemic bias, systemic discrimination, unconscious bias, and anti-black racism than any other. But there is always more to do, Mr. Speaker, which is why we have stepped up with the black entrepreneurship strategy that is responding to the needs by black communities to access more capital, to create the prosperity that they so need to be able to create for their communities, why we're continuing to invest in anti-black racism initiatives, continuing to stand with the black community. There's always more to do, and we will do it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Abortion is health care. 1 in 3 people who can get pregnant will need abortion care in their lifetime. But for close to a decade, this Liberal government failed to remove barriers, letting Conservative premiers cut access to abortion. And this Conservative leader secretly voted 5 times to take away the right to choose. Canadians want to see access to reproductive health care protected. Why have the Liberals not enforced the Canada Health Act to protect equal access to health care, including abortion?
The Right Honourable.
Always straight to the divisive.
My daughter's in the gallery today, so I want her to hear me as long as everyone else does. This government is unequivocally pro-choice. We will always defend a woman's right to choose.
Did he say his daughter was in the gallery?
So we've actually pulled back funding from provinces that haven't been delivering access to abortion in their jurisdictions, why we will continue to enforce the Canada Health Act. But, Mr. Speaker, it is the Conservative Party, with its dangerous attack on women's rights, that should have people worried right across the country. At a time where we've seen Roe versus Wade overturned, attacks on women's rights, the Conservative leader can't stand up and defend women's rights.
Pierre should apologize to Trudeau's daughter for brutally beating Trudeau.
All members, please do not make mention to people in the galleries. It is against the rules of this place.
You can't do that during question period.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for St. Laurent. Mr. Speaker, our government has always protected women's right to choose. But the anti-choice lobby of the caucus and the Conservative caucus and the leader are controlling it. And some of these anti-choice organizations that support the Conservatives use deceptive tactics to deter women from accessing a complete array of reproductive care. Can the Prime Minister tell Canadians about the measures taken by our government to protect women from these centres?
Le très honorable.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'd like to thank the member for St. Laurent for her diligent work on defending women's rights. We have heard too many women tell us about how they experienced shame, and that's unacceptable. That's why yesterday we presented a bill to force these centres to be more transparent. Otherwise, they risk losing their status as a charitable organization. Unlike the Conservative leader, the Liberals will always defend women's right to choose and their right to access the health care they need, including the entire array of reproductive care services. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Here we go.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that he opposes taking the GST off of new homes. He wants to keep the taxes high and keep housing prices rising. His solution is to fund more bureaucracy. And what has that done? Well, that's doubled housing costs. It's caused a 39% increase in homelessness rates. So I've got an idea. Why don't we let Canadians decide? If he won't have a carbon tax election, why don't we have a housing tax election and allow Canadians to decide on more bureaucracy through him or axing the sales tax through me?
There you go.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians watching today will see that the Leader of the Opposition is refusing to stand up and take a strong position in protecting women's rights unequivocally in this House. He can't because his MPs won't let him. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, he's refusing to protect his MPs by not getting the security clearance necessary to get fully informed on threats to our democracy from foreign powers. Why won't he get the security clearance necessary to take international interference seriously? That's right.
Just release the names and let the traitors be known.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, his tinfoil hat conspiracy theories and misinformation will not distract. We stand up for women's rights every day on this side. It has been our 20-year-long policy in the Conservative Party that there will be no restrictions on women's reproductive choices or on abortion. He knows that, but he doesn't want to discuss the issues that we do disagree on, which are this. Housing costs have doubled under him. His solution is to spend billions more on bureaucracy that drives them up further. We want to help women and men own a home, so will he vote for a housing tax election?
There you go. I love the enthusiasm, man. Over an hour into it, and they're still jumping up. He's thinking about muting the mic. But he won't.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be interested to see him do a very simple thing in his next answer. Switch the order of the statements he just made. Anytime he talks about unequivocally standing up for women's rights in this House, crickets from the Conservative backbench. That is because consistently members of the Conservative Party of Canada move forward measures that restrict and restrain women's rights, that limit women's rights to full suite of reproductive services. The Conservative Party members do not stand up for women's rights, so nor does the...
What the hell is he talking about?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of women's rights, just yesterday, his former parliamentary secretary came out publicly, Selina Cesar-Chavan, and said that she was abused, intimidated, and mistreated by this Prime Minister, that he used her for his fake feminist agenda.
Wow.
He treated her like garbage, Mr. Speaker. It is terrible the way he exercises hypocrisy. Housing hypocrisy by doubling costs, tax hypocrisy by raising people's prices while flying around the world. Yep. How about putting an end to the hypocrisy and calling a carbon tax election?
He's good at politicking. I'll give him that.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What is fascinating, Mr. Speaker, is the spectacle of watching...
I would ask the honourable members to not speak when they are not recognized by the chair. I insist. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is fascinating to see the lengths to which the Conservative leader will go to avoid the issue of national security, to avoid the issue of safety of Canadians, to avoid talking about issues of foreign interference, because he cannot answer why he refuses to take the security clearance that would allow him to access top secret information focused on keeping his members safe, keeping our democracy safe. We know that foreign governments interfered in the last leadership campaigns in the Conservative Party. He wants nothing to do.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, Prime Minister is coming unglued. He's flailing around, spreading conspiracy theories and demonstrable disinformation in order to distract from the fact that not only did he double housing costs, double gun crime, and double food bank use, but now 24 of his own MPs want to fire him. We can't go on like this with a prime minister who admits he can't even sleep at night because he is so in knots. Will he let his 24 dissident MPs vote freely on a non-confidence motion so we can have a carbon tax?
There you go. He's unfit to be prime minister.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm confused about what happened. The Conservative Party used to be out defense of Canada, but they dropped the defense spending to below 1% last time they were in office. They're supposed to be about law and order, but they stand against stronger measures on gun control. And they're supposed to be about national security, and the leader of the Conservative Party refuses to get the necessary security briefings to keep our democracy safe and to distinguish from the conspiracy theories that float around what is fact and what is fiction. Why won't he trust our national security agencies?
Mary Ng is on Weibo right now, Chinese Facebook.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, security and safety depends on housing. In Quebec, the cost of housing has doubled. In Montreal, the cost of rent has tripled after 9 years of this Prime Minister who's building bureaucracy, who's printing money, who's broken the immigration system, and who has applied taxes on corrupt businesses. And that's why I've proposed a common sense idea to cut the GST on housing. The Prime Minister says that he'd rather put money into bureaucracy. I want to cut taxes for those who are buying a home. Can we have an election on the question of eliminating the GST on housing? Yes or no?
There you go.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are extremely perplexed right now because we know very well that the Conservatives, apparently, according to themselves, are interested in law and order and crime and national security and defense. It's in everything that they put out in the elections. But when it comes time where there's a real threat to Canadians' safety and even to the safety of his own MPs, the Conservative leader refuses to get his security clearance. He refuses to take his responsibilities seriously. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Every party here voted to protect supply management with C-282. Every party stood with farmers to call on the Senate to stop blocking this bill. Everyone is telling Senators Beam and Harder to get to work. It's time today for the Prime Minister to take his responsibilities seriously, to be responsible for our farmers. He appointed the senators who are blocking this bill, and it's his fault that we're stuck with them. Will he finally ask these two Royal Highnesses to pass Bill C-282 immediately?
Wow.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have always been very clear that we will protect supply management. That's what we did against the Trump administration. That's what we will continue to do by making sure that we keep our promises to always protect supply management in any free trade negotiations that we undertake in the coming years. We are defending that right now, and we expect the Senate to pass this bill so that we can make sure that the future of supply management will always be protected for Canadians. We completely agree with the Bloc Québécois on this. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé.
Pierre's coming back
Nice
up.
words,
Don't worry,
Mr.
folks.
Speaker, but not only did he appoint these senators, the senators that are blocking C-282, but one of the two of them is even a good buddy of his. Peter Harder brags about it on his Senate webpage. He says that the Prime Minister, when he was in the opposition, called him several times for advice and help. And then 6 months later, he got a Senate seat. The Prime Minister in person picked up the phone and called him. If the Prime Minister can call him for advice, can he not ring him up to tell him to do his job? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the independence and the important work that the Senate does. The Senate studies bills, makes recommendations, and over the years, we've appointed exceptional senators who are doing responsible and diligent work in that place. At the same time, we always expect the senators to take into account the will and the decisions of this House. And the House voted unanimously to protect supply management, as we've always committed to do, protecting supply management in any trade agreement and free trade negotiations. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
There we go.
9 years after this Prime Minister promised to end chronic homelessness, it's gone up by 38%. But happily, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness says that my Conservative plan to eliminate the GST on the purchase of a new home is, quote, intelligent. So if the Prime Minister is really interested in ending the housing crisis that he created, will he listen to the people who are trying to end homelessness and accept my common sense plan and eliminate the GST on new homes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. To fight homelessness, I would recommend that the Conservative leader call his friends, the Conservative premiers of Saskatchewan and Ontario, to accept and tell them to accept the money that we're putting on the table to fight homelessness and end the encampments that are making people so vulnerable. But it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, to see to what extent the Conservative leader refuses to answer a very simple question. Why is he refusing to get
Release the names.
Security clearance to protect our institutions, our democracy, and his own colleagues in the Conservative Party?
His MP, like 3 people next to him,
The Honourable
is
Leader of the
compromised.
Opposition.